The Donovan Tower stood like a blade of steel piercing the Manhattan skyline. 80 stories of shimmering glass and black steel, it was both a monument to wealth and a warning to anyone who dared oppose its owner. Inside its top floor, beneath, a ceiling of sculpted glass panels and a chandelier worth more than most people's homes, the boardroom buzzed with tension. Executives in sharp suits whispered to one another, their eyes fixed on glowing screens filled with red numbers. The world's press was circling like vultures. The billion-dollar merger with Titan Tech, once touted as a match made in heaven, was now crumbling before their eyes. At the head of the table sat Richard Donovan, billionaire, founder, and the kind of man whose presence filled every room he entered. His silver hair was cropped close, his jaw sharp as though carved from stone, and his eyes, a piercing gray, had the cold stillness of winter storms. Donovan had built his empire from nothing, or so the world said. In truth, he had clawed his way up with ruthless deals, calculated risks, and a refusal to tolerate weakness. But today, weakness was everywhere. The engineers had spent months trying to align the company's massive systems for integration. Every test had failed, millions of dollars had already been burned in failed attempts, and Titan Tech's board was losing patience. Investors were whispering, shareholders were restless, and Donovan, usually the man with answers, sat with his fingers pressed tightly together, saying nothing. He knew one truth. Empires didn't fall because of markets. They fell because of flaws within. "Sir," began Elaine Foster, his chief technology officer, her voice brittle as glass. "We've run every simulation. We've thrown every team at the problem. The system crash is consistent. No patch is working. If we don't resolve this in 72 hours, Titan Tech's lawyers will walk." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Around the table, heads turned toward Donovan. Everyone waited for his reaction. A plan, an order, a miracle. Instead, he asked one question. Who's responsible? No one spoke. Elaine's face flushed. The engineers looked down at their hands, and the consultants exchanged nervous glances. Finally, Donovan leaned forward, his voice low and edged with menace. "Billions are at stake. My reputation is at stake. And you're telling me that out of the finest minds in this building, not one of you can find the flaw?" Silence. Donovan stood. His chair groaned against the polished oak floor. He walked to the window, staring down at the city. His city. Alive with traffic and neon lights. His reflection stared back at him, powerful, untouchable, yet suddenly shadowed by doubt. For the first time in years, he felt the ground shift beneath him. While the executives whispered, a quiet presence lingered near the edge of the room. Marcus Reed, the janitor, was invisible to them all. Dressed in his gray uniform, holding a mop, he worked silently in the corner, polishing the marble floor. Marcus was in his late 30s, tall but stooped slightly from years of physical work. His dark skin glistened faintly under the bright lights, and his hands were rough, marked by labor. But his eyes, deep brown, sharp, restless, moved constantly, watching the screens, the graphs, the panic. He understood more than anyone, guessed, because Marcus had a secret. For years, he had been teaching himself coding at night in his small apartment in Queens. He had studied system architecture, algorithms, cybersecurity, not through schools or universities, but through used books, online tutorials, and trial and error. Every paycheck, small as it was, Marcus spent a part of it on old laptops, reference manuals, and cloud subscriptions. His notebook, battered, filled with sketches, lines of code, and theories, never left his side. He had seen the company's engineers struggling for weeks. From the shadows of the office, while emptying bins or wiping tables, he had watched their frantic debates. And in his notebook, Marcus had drawn his own conclusions. Quietly, carefully, as though sketching maps. to a hidden treasure. But he knew his place. To them, he was a janitor, invisible, irrelevant. Still, tonight felt different. The air in the boardroom was thick with dread. Executives who had once sneered at the cleaning staff now fidgeted like schoolchildren awaiting punishment. Donovan's icy silence was more terrifying than any outburst. Marcus shifted slightly, clutching his mop handle tighter. His worn-out notebook was in his pocket, edges frayed from use. He wanted to speak, desperately. His mind screamed at him, "You know the flaw. You can fix this." But fear held him back. Who would believe a janitor in a billion-dollar boardroom? Elaine. Donovan finally said, his tone sharp enough to cut glass. "If this merger collapses, you're finished. Understand me? All of you are." Elaine's throat tightened, but she nodded. Marcus lowered his eyes. The words were cruel, but they revealed something. Desperation. Donovan, for all his wealth and power, was running out of options. And Marcus, the invisible janitor, was holding the answer in a battered notebook. For the first time in his life, Marcus felt the pull of destiny. As the executives filed out, whispering frantically about the disaster, Donovan remained at the window, his reflection trapped in the glass. He looked like a man staring into the abyss. Marcus lingered behind, pretending, to polish the floor. His heart pounded in his chest. "Say it," his mind urged. "Just say it." But the words froze in his throat. Not yet. Not tonight. The subway groaned as it rattled toward Queens, lights flickering in the tunnel like a broken heartbeat. Marcus sat hunched on a cracked plastic seat, his mop bucket clattering. Softly beside him, around him, tired workers slumped in silence, clutching bags of groceries or dozing off against the windows. But Marcus's mind wasn't on the subway. It was on the boardroom, on Donovan's face, cold and sharp, like a man, carved from marble but ready to shatter under pressure. On the engineers who had looked so helpless, despite their designer suits and elite degrees, and on the notebook burning in his jacket pocket. He slipped it out, resting it carefully on his lap as though it were something fragile. The cover was worn leather, corners frayed, the spine patched with duct tape. On the first page, in his small, neat handwriting, were 3 words: observe, learn, solve. It wasn't just a notebook. It was Marcus's world, the record of every idea, every late-night discovery, every system flaw he had ever noticed while cleaning the glass tower of Donovan Enterprises. He flipped through the pages as the subway clattered along. Hand-drawn diagrams of network structures filled one section. Pages of scrawled code, loops and sequences stretched across another. Between the technical sketches were scraps of personal reflection, reminders to keep going, to never give up, to prove that a janitor could be more than invisible. Tonight, one page mattered most. It showed the integration system Donovan's engineers had been struggling with. Marcus had drawn it weeks ago after overhearing their complaints. At the center of his sketch, circled in bold red ink, was the flaw no one else had seen. A small compatibility error buried deep in the system's core. Not obvious, not dramatic, but enough to cause the crashes that were tearing the merger apart. Marcus tapped his pen against the circled flaw, heart racing. He knew he was right. He had run the logic a dozen times in his head. The problem wasn't the system. It was the arrogance of the experts. They were staring at the machine from above, trying to force it into submission. But Marcus had learned to see differently. Not like a master commanding soldiers, but like a janitor watching the smallest details no one else noticed. His hands tightened around the notebook. He wanted to march into Donovan's office tomorrow, slam this book on the table and say, here's your answer. But reality clawed him back. Who would listen to him? A man in a gray uniform who scrubbed toilets and emptied bins? To them, he wasn't a savior. He was invisible. The subway screeched to a halt at Jackson Heights. Marcus stood, tucking the notebook back into his jacket. He carried his mop bucket up the stairs and into the cold night. Queens smelled of fried food and exhaust. Neon signs flickered above bodegas, and kids in hoodies laughed as they sped by on bikes. Marcus walked the cracked sidewalks to his small apartment building, a worn brick block with peeling paint, sagging fire escapes, and a flickering hallway light that buzzed like a trapped insect. His apartment was on the 3rd floor, a one-bedroom unit with thin walls and a draft that crept through the windows in winter. The furniture was old, the paint chipped, but the space was neat. Shelves along one wall sagged under the weight of books, programming manuals, business, strategy guides, used textbooks he had bought cheap. On the desk sat a second-hand laptop, patched together with tape and replacement parts scavenged from thrift shops. Marcus dropped his mop bucket by the door and set the notebook on the desk. He sat down, opened the laptop, and began typing. Lines of code flickered across the screen. His fingers moved quickly, instinctively, like a pianist playing a piece he knew by heart. He was running simulations, testing the same flaw he had circled. In the notebook, each time the system crashed exactly where he had predicted. "Got you," he muttered under his breath. For a moment, the exhaustion of his 12-hour shift faded. He wasn't a janitor anymore. He wasn't invisible. He was an architect, a problem solver, someone who saw the world in patterns and possibilities. But then he leaned back, staring at the cracked ceiling, and the weight of reality returned. What good was knowing the answer if no one would hear it? He thought of Donovan again, the billionaire who ruled from the top of the tower. Marcus had cleaned his office late at night, seen the family photos on his desk, the expensive scotch bottles, the endless city view. To Donovan, Marcus was just another nameless worker, one of thousands keeping the empire clean and polished. Still, Marcus remembered something else, the look on Donovan's face tonight. Not arrogance, not cruelty, but fear. It was the first crack Marcus had ever seen, in the man of steel. And maybe, just maybe, fear would make him listen. Marcus closed the notebook, resting his hand on the battered cover. He whispered the words written inside it. Observe, learn, solve. Then he added something new. Speak. The Donovan Tower stood like a blade of glass cutting into the New York skyline. By day, it shimmered with power. By night, it glowed, against the darkness like a lighthouse of wealth. But inside, the mood was anything but luminous. The merger was collapsing. Donovan sat in his penthouse office, alone, staring out at the city. The lights below spread endlessly. But tonight, they looked like warning signals blinking in the dark. His reflection in the glass stared back. Tailored suit, silver streaks at his temples, jaw tight with exhaustion. Alexander Donovan wasn't used to losing. Not deals, not negotiations, not control. Yet for weeks now, the merger with Orion, technologies worth billions, had been unraveling. Technical incompatibilities, the engineers had said. We'll fix it. But they hadn't. He had poured money into consultants, teams, advisors, all of whom had failed. Every hour of delay cost him millions. Investors were restless, competitors circled like sharks, and worst of all, his reputation, the one thing he had built his empire on, was at risk. For the first time in years, Alexander Donovan felt the ground shifting beneath him. He leaned back in his chair, pinching the bridge of his nose. His father's voice echoed in his memory. A true leader never shows weakness. A king never bleeds in front of his court. Donovan had lived by that creed all his life. Ruthless, unyielding. But tonight, in the silence of his office, he felt the cracks widening. Meanwhile, on the 22nd floor, Marcus was scrubbing the marble floors outside the boardroom. His mop squeaked softly against the stone, the sound echoing in the empty hallway. The doors to the boardroom were slightly ajar. Inside, he could hear two executives whispering. Donovan's furious. If this merger fails, heads are going to roll. Not just heads, divisions. Entire teams will be gutted. And the press? They're circling. If word leaks... The voices faded as the men walked away, leaving Marcus alone with his mop. He froze, his heart pounding. He already knew the system's flaw. He had proof in his notebook. But hearing it spelled out like this made the stakes clearer. This wasn't just about code. It was about livelihoods, reputations, empires. He tightened his grip on the mop handle, staring at the polished floor. You could fix this. You could save them all. But then another voice echoed in his head. Sharper, crueler. His stepfather's voice from years ago. You'll never be anything but a janitor, boy. Stop dreaming. Marcus blinked hard, shaking it off. He wanted to believe he was more. His notebook said he was more. But standing here in his uniform, smelling of bleach, invisible to the men in suits, he wondered if stepping forward would only make them laugh at him. Still, Donovan had looked desperate in that boardroom. For the first time, Marcus had seen something human in the billionaire. And maybe, just maybe, desperation opened doors that arrogance never would. Later that night, Donovan called his inner circle together. 10 executives sat around the massive glass table, laptops glowing, eyes bloodshot from endless nights of failure. Charts, data, and projections flickered on the screen. Gentlemen, Donovan began, his voice low but sharp. We are running out of time. One of the executives shifted uncomfortably. Sir, with respect, every firm we've consulted says the same thing. The integration isn't possible without rebuilding. Donovan slammed a hand on the table. Impossible is not an answer I accept. The room went silent. Find me a solution, Donovan said, his voice cutting through the stillness. I don't care where it comes from. I don't care who has it. Fix this. He didn't know that. Just outside the door, Marcus had paused with his mop, notebook clutched tight under his arm. His hand trembled as he reached toward the door. For a moment, he imagined walking in, placing the notebook on the table, and showing them all the flaw. The silence, the shock. Donovan's face when he realized the janitor had solved what his million-dollar experts couldn't. But fear pulled him back. Not tonight. Not yet. Instead, Marcus turned away, retreating down the hall with the notebook pressed against his chest. But deep inside, a fire had been lit. He couldn't stay silent forever. The boardroom was suffocating with tension. The fluorescent lights hummed above, casting a sterile glow over exhausted faces. Laptops flickered with endless lines of numbers and graphs, none of them offering a solution. Alexander Donovan sat at the head of the table, fists clenched. His executives avoided his gaze, eyes buried in their screens as if formulas and projections could protect them from his wrath. Donovan's patience was unraveling. He had built empires, bent markets to his will, and crushed competitors without blinking. But this flaw was eating through his company like acid, and no one in this room could stop it. Finally, he broke the silence. If we don't fix this within 48 hours, he said coldly, the merger dies. And when it dies, so do a lot of careers in this room. A ripple of fear passed over the executives' faces. From the corner of the room, a soft squeak broke the silence, a mop being wrung out. All heads turned. Marcus froze. He hadn't meant to interrupt. His cart stood awkwardly by the wall, mop dripping onto the polished floor. He could feel the heat of a dozen glares burning into him. One executive snapped, "Get him out of here!" Marcus's throat went dry. His notebook was clutched under his arm, the leather edges worn soft from years of use. He could walk out, pretend this moment never happened, but something inside him, something stronger than fear, pushed back. Before he realized it, the words tumbled out of his mouth. "I think I know what's wrong with your system." The room went dead silent. For a moment, Marcus thought he had imagined saying it, but the looks on their faces told him otherwise. Shock, annoyance, disbelief. One of the executives laughed bitterly. "Did the janitor just say he can fix a multi-billion-dollar merger?" Another shook his head. "This is absurd. Mr. Donovan, we don't have time for—" Quiet. The single word froze everyone. Donovan's voice had dropped, low and dangerous, but his eyes were fixed on Marcus. Not with anger, but with curiosity. "What did you say?" Donovan asked slowly. Marcus's legs trembled, but he forced himself to stand straighter. He held out the notebook with both hands. "I've been watching, listening. When I clean the offices, I hear the engineers talk. I read what they leave on the boards, and I think I know where the flaw is." The executives erupted. "This is ridiculous. A janitor? He's wasting our time," but Donovan raised a hand, silencing them all. His sharp gaze never left Marcus. "Show me." Marcus's breath caught. He stepped forward, the notebook shaking in his hands as he placed it on the table. The executives leaned away from it like it was a bomb. Donovan pulled it closer. Inside, page after page of scribbled notes, diagrams, and code filled the worn pages. Not random doodles, but careful observations, lines of logic, potential fixes. The room fell quiet as Donovan flipped through it. The deeper he read, the tighter his jaw became. Finally, he looked up at Marcus. "You're saying the error isn't in the merger code, it's in the predictive algorithm?" Marcus swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. It's not processing the variance. In data inputs, the system loops back on itself. That's why integration keeps failing." One of the engineers scoffed. "That's oversimplified. He doesn't understand." "Test it," Donovan snapped. The engineer froze, then, reluctantly, began typing the adjustment Marcus described. The room waited in tense silence as the system processed. Seconds ticked by. Then, the error logs cleared, the graphs realigned, the system stabilized. Gasps filled the room. The impossible flaw was gone. Donovan leaned back slowly, staring at Marcus like he was seeing him for the first time. "You," Donovan said, his voice quieter now, almost reverent. "You just saved this company." Marcus blinked. His hands were still trembling. He half expected someone to laugh, to call it luck, but no one did. The executives sat in stunned silence, their million-dollar suits and degrees rendered meaningless, in the face of one janitor's notebook. Donovan stood, closing the notebook gently, as though it were made of glass. He walked around the table until he stood directly in front of Marcus. "What's your name?" Marcus, sir. Marcus Reed." Donovan studied him for a long moment, then extended his hand. "Marcus Reed, you're not a janitor anymore." The room erupted in murmurs, disbelief, awe. Marcus stared at Donovan's hand, then slowly reached out and shook it. For the first time in his life, someone powerful had seen him, really seen him. And in that moment, Marcus's life changed forever. Marcus Reed had spent the last 10 years invisible. He mopped marble floors, while billion-dollar deals unfolded inches away. He scrubbed polished glass doors while executives, too busy to notice, brushed past him like he was part of the furniture. But the morning after the boardroom incident, the world was different. He walked into Donovan Enterprises not in his janitor's uniform, but in a freshly pressed suit Donovan's assistant had sent to his apartment the night before. For the first time, Marcus didn't push the cleaning cart. He carried only his notebook. Still, as the security guard scanned his badge and waved him through, Marcus caught the raised eyebrow. What's a janitor doing in a suit? The stares didn't stop there. Employees in the lobby paused mid-conversation. Secretaries tilted their heads. Engineers who had once ignored him now whispered as he passed. By the time Marcus stepped into the elevator, his palms were sweating. The doors slid open at the top floor. The executive wing. Waiting there was Donovan himself. Tall, composed, his tailored suit sharp as a blade, the billionaire's presence seemed to quiet the air around him. He gave Marcus a single nod. "Good morning, Mr. Reed. Welcome to your new position." Marcus blinked. "My position?" Donovan's lips curved into something between a smirk and a smile. "You didn't think I'd let you go back to sweeping floors after what you did you?" Before Marcus could answer, Donovan gestured toward the glass doors of the boardroom. "Come. There are people you need to meet." The boardroom was the same one where Marcus had changed everything less than 24 hours ago. But this time, he wasn't standing in the corner with a mop. He had a seat at the table. Donovan introduced him simply. "This is Marcus Reed, our newest advisor." The room shifted uneasily. Executives shifted in leather chairs, eyes narrowing, lips tightening. Marcus could almost hear their thoughts. Advisor. Him. One finally spoke. Caldwell, the chief operating officer, his voice dripping with disdain. "With all due respect, Mr. Donovan, the man is a janitor." The words hung heavy in the air. Marcus's stomach twisted. A dozen pairs of eyes bore into him, some openly, hostile, others amused, but Donovan's gaze cut through the tension like a knife. "No," he said firmly. "He's the man who fixed what none of you could." Silence. Donovan turned back to Marcus. "I want you here, Reed, not to polish the table, but to challenge it. This company has been blinded by its own arrogance. You see what others don't. That's your strength." Marcus swallowed hard. His instinct was to shrink back, to apologize for even being here. But then he remembered the moment from last night, the system stabilizing, the billionaire's hand extended, the words, "You're not a janitor anymore." He forced himself to sit taller. "Thank you," Marcus said quietly, but firmly. "I won't waste this chance." The meeting dragged on, filled with graphs, legal jargon, and financial debates that Marcus struggled to follow. But while the executives bickered over margins, Marcus's eyes wandered to the screen, and he saw something, not a flaw this time, but a missed opportunity, a pattern in the numbers no one else seemed to notice. He scribbled quickly into his notebook, the pen scratching against paper. When he raised his hand to speak, the room went still. Caldwell leaned back, smirking. "This should be good." Marcus's throat went dry. "What if I'm wrong this time? What if last night was just luck?" But then Donovan's eyes met his. Calm, steady, expectant. Marcus exhaled slowly. "I think you're underestimating the potential here," Marcus began, pointing at the chart. "If you shift focus from integration speed to data security, not only will the merger succeed, it'll create an advantage your competitors can't match." The room went silent. An analyst quickly ran the numbers. His face paled. He's right. If we adjust priorities, the projections nearly double." Gasps echoed across the table. Donovan didn't smile, but his eyes burned with quiet pride. "Not luck," he murmured. "Instinct." As the meeting ended, the executives filed out with cold glares and muttered complaints. Marcus gathered his notebook, heart pounding. Donovan placed a hand on his shoulder. "They won't accept you easily," he said quietly. "You threaten everything they think makes them important. Degrees, titles, status." Marcus looked down at his scuffed notebook. "All I have is this." Donovan shook his head. "No. What you have is vision. And that's rarer than any diploma." For the first time in his life, Marcus believed it. As he walked out of the boardroom, whispers followed him again. But this time, Marcus didn't shrink. He didn't hide. He knew something they didn't. The janitor had a seat at the table now, and he wasn't giving it back. Before Marcus Reed was the man who saved Donovan Enterprises, he was just a boy from a neighborhood most people tried to forget. The streets where he grew up weren't lined with polished glass towers, but with flickering streetlights and cracked sidewalks. His mother worked 2 jobs, diner waitress by day, hospital cleaner by night, and still barely kept food on the table. His father had walked out when Marcus was 10, leaving behind nothing but an old toolbox and a silence that hung heavy in the house. Marcus didn't have much, but what he did have was curiosity. At 12, he found a broken computer in a junk pile behind his school. The screen was cracked, the hard drive useless, but something about it fascinated him. He lugged it home, tore it apart piece by piece, and tried to understand how it worked. His mother shook her head when she came home from work at midnight and found him hunched over wires. "Baby, you can't fix the world with scraps." But Marcus only smiled. "Maybe I can." The notebook came a year later, a gift from a sympathetic librarian who noticed the boy spending hours in the corner with outdated coding manuals and borrowed math textbooks. "It's not much," she'd said, pressing the plain leather-bound book into his hands. "But smart kids like you need somewhere to put your ideas." Marcus had clutched it like treasure. From that day on, the notebook became his world. He filled it with algorithms, sketches of systems, half-baked business models, and solutions to problems nobody had asked him to solve. When bullies mocked him for being the janitor's kid, Marcus wrote even harder. When teachers told him college wasn't realistic, he poured his frustration onto the pages. Every idea went into that notebook, his silent rebellion against the limits life tried to place on him. By 17, Marcus was working nights as a janitor, just like his mother. School wasn't enough to pay bills, and college was a dream too expensive to chase. He watched people in suits walk past him every evening, never noticing the boys scrubbing the floors. But Marcus noticed them. He listened when engineers argued, in hallways. He studied the presentations left open on projector screens. He read discarded drafts in trash bins before emptying them out. Every scrap of knowledge, every overheard strategy, Marcus added it to his notebook. It was his secret. Education. The years blurred together. Marcus grew into a man defined by silence and observation. To most, he was invisible, just another janitor in a gray uniform. But late at night, when the offices were empty and the city lights glowed faintly through tall windows, Marcus would sit with his notebook under the hum of fluorescent lights. He solved puzzles no one gave him. He dreamed of systems that worked better, cleaner, faster. He built ideas no one would ever see. Or so he thought. Now, sitting in his small apartment the night after Donovan had given him a seat at the table, Marcus opened that same notebook. The leather was worn, its pages filled with years of cramped handwriting and ink smudges. He traced the lines with his fingers, remembering the boy he used to be. The boy who believed no one would ever read his words, but someone had. A billionaire. And for the first time, Marcus wondered if maybe, just maybe, the notebook wasn't finished yet. The marble-walled boardroom of Donovan Enterprises looked calm on the surface, but beneath the polished veneer, whispers of rebellion spread like wildfire. It had been 3 days since Marcus Reed had stunned everyone by solving the flaw that nearly destroyed the billion-dollar merger. 3 days since Donovan himself, the man who never showed mercy, had stood before his board and declared, "From this moment forward, Marcus is no longer a janitor. He is a strategist. My strategist." The words still burned in the ears of the executives who had spent decades climbing the corporate ladder. A janitor with a notebook, elevated above them. At the far end of the conference table sat Evelyn Hart, the company's chief operations officer. Her manicured fingers tapped against her tablet as she scrolled through Marcus's file. No degree, no pedigree, no qualifications by any traditional measure. "This is madness," she whispered to Charles Kent, the CFO. "Donovan's lost his mind." Kent adjusted his cufflinks, his jaw tight. "A man like Donovan doesn't lose his mind. He sees something we don't. That's even worse." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "And if we don't do something, that janitor is going to dismantle everything we've built." Marcus, of course, knew none of this. At that very moment, he was sitting in a small side office Donovan had given him, surrounded by whiteboards covered in his handwriting. For the first time in his life, he wasn't scribbling ideas into his notebook in secret. He was mapping out full-scale strategies for the company, system optimizations, cost reductions, risk analyses. Donovan stopped by the office that night, watching him from the doorway. "You don't waste time, do you?" the billionaire asked. Marcus looked up, startled. "I've been waiting for this chance my whole life. I can't waste it." For a brief moment, Donovan's stern expression softened. He saw something in Marcus, something that reminded him of his younger self, clawing his way out of obscurity, with nothing but fire and grit. But Donovan also knew his board, and he knew vultures circled when they smelled weakness. "Marcus," he said quietly, "there are people here who will not accept you. No matter what you prove, no matter what you solve." Marcus straightened. "Then I'll just keep solving until they can't ignore me." Donovan gave a faint smile. "Good, but be ready. They won't just ignore you. They'll fight you." Back in the boardroom, Evelyn and Kent weren't the only ones plotting. Whispers turned into plans. Plans turned into alliances. "He's a liability," said one executive. "He could expose flaws we've hidden for years," said another. "If Donovan trusts him, that makes him dangerous," murmured a third. By the end of the night, they had an unspoken agreement. Marcus Reed would not last. And for the first time since his rise began, Marcus's notebook might not be enough to protect him. The morning sunlight poured through the Donovan Tower's glass facade, casting long, golden streaks across the lobby. To most employees, it was just another Monday. But for Marcus Reed, the janitor turned strategist, this day would determine whether he belonged in this world or was destined to be thrown back out. He didn't know it yet, but a trap had already been set. At the top floor, Evelyn Hart, the chief operations officer, was waiting with a plan. "Let's see if Donovan's little prodigy can handle this," she murmured, sliding a thick binder across the conference table to Charles Kent, the CFO. Inside was a doomed project proposal, a mess of conflicting data, outdated projections and buried errors so subtle that even senior managers had missed them before. "We'll tell Donovan it's urgent," Evelyn said coolly. "If the janitor can fix it, fine. But if he fails, and he will, Donovan will have to admit his mistake." Kent smirked, and Marcus Reed goes back to mopping floors. That afternoon, Marcus was summoned to a sudden emergency review meeting. He walked in carrying his ever-present notebook, feeling every pair of eyes burn into him. Evelyn slid the binder toward him. "This project has hit a roadblock. Mr. Donovan insists you take a look." Marcus opened it, scanning page after page of numbers. His heart sank. Something was off. The data didn't align. The projections contradicted themselves. He could almost hear the whispers in the room. "He's in over his head. He's not one of us. He'll fold." But instead of panic, Marcus felt something familiar. This was just like all those nights cleaning offices, overhearing engineers struggle with systems he later cracked open in his notebook. He closed his eyes, let the noise of the boardroom fade, and began scribbling on the margin of the report. 10 minutes passed. 15. Sweat trickled down his temple, but his pencil didn't stop moving. Finally, he looked up. "This isn't a project problem," Marcus said firmly. "It's a structural flaw in the proposal itself. The projections are built on outdated financial assumptions, and the software integration plan is mathematically impossible. If you'd approved this, the company would have bled hundreds of millions." The boardroom went silent. Evelyn's smile froze. Kent shifted in his chair. Donovan, sitting at the head of the table, leaned forward, his steel-gray eyes glinting. "Are you certain?" Marcus slid his notebook across the table. Every error, every contradiction was circled in red. "I'm certain." Donovan scanned it, then slammed the binder shut. "He's right. Every word of it." The air crackled. The trap had backfired. Donovan stood, his voice cold and cutting. "Let this be clear to everyone in this room. Marcus Reed is not a janitor. He is the reason this company is still standing. If you doubt him, you doubt me." That night, Marcus sat alone in his small office, staring at his notebook. His hands were still shaking. For the first time, he realized this wasn't just about proving himself. This was about survival. The board didn't just dislike him, they wanted him gone, and if he wasn't careful, the next trap might not be one he could escape. The following week, Donovan Tower buzzed with anticipation. Rumors had spread across the entire company. The new prodigy Janitor would be presenting at the Global Tech Investors Summit, standing shoulder to shoulder with billionaires, analysts, and media from around the world. For Marcus, the idea felt unreal. Just months ago, he was scrubbing gum off the marble floors. Now he was expected to defend Donovan Enterprises' future in front of cameras. But what he didn't know was that the summit had been carefully engineered by his enemies. In a private lounge, Evelyn Hart and Charles Kent plotted their final strike. "World loves a rise-from-nothing story," Evelyn said, sipping her espresso. "But it will love tearing him down even more. All we need is one slip, one stumble, one miscalculation, on a global stage, and Donovan will have no choice but to admit his mistake." Kent smirked. "So we feed him the wrong data. Let him humiliate himself in front of investors. By the time the dust settles, Donovan will be cleaning his mess for once." They shook hands, satisfied. The morning of the summit, Marcus sat in a hotel suite Donovan had arranged, staring at his reflection in the mirror. The crisp navy suit felt foreign on him. He adjusted the tie 3 times before finally giving up. Donovan stepped into the room, his towering presence filling the space. "You look nervous," the billionaire said, his voice steady. Marcus laughed, dryly. "Nervous? I'm about to stand in front of people who see me as nothing more than a janitor pretending to play genius." Donovan placed a hand on his shoulder. "Marcus, genius isn't about where you came from. It's about seeing what others can't. You've already saved this company once. Just be yourself, and let them see the notebook." Marcus nodded slowly. His battered notebook lay on the desk, pages filled with scribbles, diagrams, and midnight equations. It was messy, imperfect, but it was his truth. The ballroom erupted in flashes as cameras clicked. Investors murmured in different languages. Screens displayed towering charts. At the front, Marcus took his place beside Donovan, his palms damp. Evelyn and Kent watched from the sidelines, barely concealing their grins. As Marcus began to speak, assistants handed him a stack of financial projections, deliberately tampered, numbers that were impossible to justify. His eyes scanned the pages, his chest tightened. "This isn't right." The investors began to frown, shifting impatiently. "Mr. Reed," one called out sharply, "your numbers don't add up. Are you wasting our time?" A ripple of laughter followed. Evelyn leaned back, satisfied. Marcus swallowed hard. He could play along and expose himself as incompetent, or he could trust his instincts. He closed the binder. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice firm, "the data I was given is wrong. Deliberately wrong." Gasps spread through the crowd. Donovan stiffened. Evelyn's smile froze. Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out his notebook. He flipped to pages filled with his scrawled calculations. "These are my numbers. They may not look polished, but they're accurate. And they prove not only why this merger works, but also Why the previous projections would have bankrupted us? He held up a page, the messy handwriting clear on the big screen. I may not look like your typical executive. I may not have a degree or a polished resume. But I know when someone is trying to destroy this company from the inside. The room erupted. Investors whispering, journalists furiously typing. Donovan rose from his chair, voice thundering. You heard him? Marcus Reed is the reason this company stands on truth, not lies. If anyone here has a problem with that, leave now. No one moved. Instead, the room broke into applause. Evelyn and Kent exchanged a horrified glance. Their plan had not only failed, it had backfired on a global stage. That night, headlines swept the world. From janitor to genius, Marcus Reed saves Donovan Empire in front of investors. But Marcus, sitting alone in his suite, didn't celebrate. He stared at his notebook, at the fragile scrawl of his midnight thoughts, and realized something chilling. If they were willing to humiliate him publicly, what would they try next? The war inside Donovan Enterprises had only just begun. The applause of the summit still echoed in Marcus's memory, but by morning it felt like a fading dream. In its place came the cold, heavy reality of what had happened. Someone inside Donovan Enterprises had set him up. He wasn't a fool. Numbers didn't corrupt themselves, and binders didn't fill with false projections by accident. This was sabotage. Back in Donovan Tower, the billionaire himself paced across his glass office, city lights stretching behind him. They wanted to humiliate you, Donovan said bluntly, his voice laced with anger. And not just you, me. Whoever did this thought they could fracture my authority by making me look like a fool for trusting you. Marcus shifted uneasily in the chair. And you don't think they're going to stop, do you? Donovan shook his head. No. If anything, they'll strike harder. People like Evelyn Hart and Charles Kent don't accept defeat. They escalate. Marcus lowered his gaze to his hands, which rested on the worn notebook. He had started carrying it everywhere now, almost like armor. Donovan's eyes fell on it. That book of yours, it seems to hold more than numbers. Marcus hesitated. He rarely spoke about it, not even to the janitors he used to share shifts with. But something, in Donovan's tone, pushed him. It's more than notes, Marcus admitted. He flipped to a page where the ink had smudged from tears long ago. It's my lifeline. When my mom was sick, I couldn't afford medical school, couldn't afford tutors. I'd sneak into libraries, copy formulas I didn't understand, and work them out on these pages. She used to tell me, write it down, Marcus. If you write it, it can't be taken from you. His voice faltered. She passed before she saw me solve anything real. But this, he tapped the notebook. This is the only proof I have that I didn't waste what she sacrificed. Donovan's usual hard expression softened. Your mother would be proud. You've done more with scraps of paper and midnight determination than most men with 10 degrees. Marcus swallowed hard, the compliment both comforting and terrifying. Because if Evelyn or Kent got their hands on this notebook, they could twist everything. Later that night, Marcus made his way to the data archives of Donovan Tower. He had asked for clearance under the guise of reviewing projections, but in truth, he was hunting. Rows of servers hummed. Blue lights blinked. The sterile air smelled of metal and secrets. Marcus sat at a terminal, typing furiously. His notebook lay open beside him, filled with scribbled queries and handwritten algorithms. Slowly, he began cross-referencing the summit's corrupted data against internal logs, and then he saw it, an unusual digital fingerprint. A string of code inserted just days before the summit, hidden in plain sight, but not to him. Marcus's pulse quickened. He traced it back through the system, line by line, until one name glowed on the screen. E. Hart. Marcus leaned back in his chair, heart pounding. He had proof. Proof Evelyn Hart herself had sabotaged him. But just as he reached for his notebook to jot down the evidence, the screen flickered. Lines of code began to vanish, erased in real time. Someone knew he was in the system. A chill ran through him. He wasn't just hunting the saboteurs anymore. They were hunting him. That night, Marcus left Donovan Tower with his notebook clutched tightly against his chest, the city's neon glow reflecting in his weary eyes. He whispered to himself, "Mom, you were right. If I don't write it down, they'll erase everything." And as the first drops of rain fell on the city streets, Marcus realized he wasn't just fighting for a promotion, or even for Donovan's trust. He was fighting for the truth itself. The next morning, Donovan's penthouse office was brighter than usual, but the mood was heavy. Marcus sat across from the Billionaire, notebook resting on his lap like a shield. "She's the one," Marcus said quietly, almost reluctant to believe it himself. "Evelyn Hart. I found her signature inside the corrupted data." Donovan's jaw tightened. He didn't look surprised. "I had my suspicions. Evelyn's always wanted more power than her chair allowed. But Marcus, listen carefully. Having proof and surviving the fallout are two very different things." Before Marcus could answer, Donovan's assistant appeared at the door. "Sir, the board is requesting your presence. They've called an emergency session. Evelyn's leading it." Donovan and Marcus exchanged a grim look. The boardroom was already buzzing when they arrived. Sleek suits, polished watches, cold stares. At the head of the table sat Evelyn Hart, immaculate as always, her pearl necklace gleaming, her red lipstick sharp enough to cut glass. "Mr. Donovan," she began sweetly, though her eyes glittered with venom, "we've convened today because of a grave concern." She tapped a folder. "This janitor of yours has been granted unprecedented access to confidential systems, and last night he attempted to tamper with secured archives. That's a breach of protocol." Murmurs rippled through the room. Marcus froze. She knew. She had turned the narrative before he even stepped into the room. "That's not true," Marcus said, his voice steady but low. "I wasn't tampering. I was tracing the corruption in our data. The same corruption that nearly destroyed us at the summit." Evelyn arched a brow. "And we're to believe a janitor uncovered what world-class analysts missed?" Her laugh was soft, but cruel. "How convenient." She slid a printed report across the table. It was a log of Marcus's late night. Access, clipped, altered, framed to look suspicious. The board members' eyes narrowed. Donovan leaned forward, fists on the table. "You're twisting this, Evelyn." He found what no one else could. But Evelyn was ready. She turned her gaze to Marcus. "Then tell us, right here, right now, what exactly did you find?" Marcus's notebook felt heavy in his hands. He flipped it open, heart pounding. Line after line of his scribbles stared back at him, his lifeline, his proof. He took a deep breath. "I found your code, Evelyn. A digital fingerprint in the corrupted projections. You planted it before the summit." The room fell silent. For a moment. Evelyn's mask slipped. Just a flicker, the faintest tightening around her eyes. Then, just as quickly, she smiled. "How bold," she said softly. "Accusing a board director with nothing but scribbles in a notebook. Tell me, gentlemen, are we really letting this boy redefine how billion-dollar companies are run?" Several board members nodded in agreement. A couple even smirked. Marcus felt his throat tighten, but Donovan spoke before he could. "Sometimes, brilliance doesn't come with a polished degree or a corner office," Donovan snapped. "Sometimes it comes from the people you overlook, and I will not allow Evelyn Hart or anyone else here to bury the truth because it makes them uncomfortable." The boardroom erupted into whispers, half of them siding with Evelyn, the other half unsure. Marcus looked down at his notebook, then up at the hostile eyes around the table. For the first time since this all began, he realized the scope of what he was up against. This wasn't about one flaw, one act of sabotage. This was a war for the soul of the company, and Evelyn Hart wasn't going to lose quietly. The boardroom didn't quiet easily. Even after Donovan's sharp words, the buzz of divided loyalties rippled like static across the table. Some members leaned toward Evelyn, swayed by her poise and reputation. Others looked to Donovan, wary of defying the man who had built the empire they sat atop. And then there was Marcus, the outsider, sitting in a leather chair that seemed far too big, holding a notebook that suddenly felt like the most dangerous weapon in the room. Evelyn Hart tapped a manicured nail on the table. Let's be rational. Mr. Donovan has always valued unconventional talent, but letting this janitor rewrite company narratives based on doodles. She let the laughter hang in the air. Gentlemen, it insults us all. Marcus felt the sting, but he caught Donovan's eyes across the table. The billionaire gave him a subtle nod. Hold your ground. Marcus opened his notebook, flipping past pages of equations, sketches, and messy notes, until he found the one that mattered most. He slid it forward. This isn't just doodles, Marcus said, his voice firmer than before. It's a trail, a pattern embedded in the system's architecture. Each time the projections shifted in our favor, the same hidden code executed. And that code points directly to Director Hart's terminal. The room stilled. One of the older board members leaned forward. That's a serious accusation. Do you have proof beyond your word? Marcus hesitated. His proof wasn't polished. It wasn't a glossy presentation or a slick graph. It was lines of raw code written in his uneven handwriting. But sometimes, truth wasn't pretty. Donovan stood. I'll vouch for him. I've reviewed his findings personally. If Marcus says Hart's responsible, I believe him. Evelyn's smile sharpened. How touching. A billionaire defending his janitor. But forgive me, Marcus, why would I, a woman with everything to lose, risk sabotaging my own company? Marcus looked straight at her, surprising himself with his steadiness. Because you don't see it as sabotage. You see it as leverage. If the merger failed, you'd be the one holding the fallback contracts. You'd profit while the rest of us burned. The words hung heavy in the air. Evelyn's eyes narrowed, just a fraction. For the first time, she didn't laugh. Bold, she said finally, her voice low. Dangerously bold. Donovan swept his gaze across the table. You all have a choice. You can back Evelyn's lies and watch this company rot from the inside, or you can face the truth, however inconvenient it may be. The board shifted uneasily. Some avoided eye contact, others whispered to their neighbors. Evelyn sat back, composed but seething, her fingers tightening around her glass of water. Marcus felt the shift too. For all her power, Evelyn had been forced to defend herself, and that meant her mask was cracking. Still, as the meeting adjourned in a haze of uncertainty, Marcus realized something chilling. Evelyn hadn't lost. She was regrouping, and snakes didn't strike until the moment was right. The city skyline glittered outside Evelyn Hart's penthouse windows, but her reflection in the glass was darker than the night. She set down her wine glass, untouched, and walked across the marble floor, her heels clicking like a metronome of control. The boardroom. Debacle replayed in her head. Marcus's voice, quiet but unshakable, pointing the finger at her. And Donovan, the man she had once admired, standing in defense of a janitor. A janitor. Her jaw tightened. Smart boy, she muttered. Too smart. On the table lay a sleek laptop, its screen glowing with lines of encrypted files. Evelyn tapped a few keys, pulling up the hidden contracts Marcus had stumbled upon. She wasn't foolish. He had only scratched the surface. What he didn't know was how deep the web ran. Offshore accounts, silent partners. Politicians with hands dirtier than hers. Marcus was dangerous, not because he knew too much, but because people were beginning to believe him. She dialed a number. A smooth male voice answered almost instantly. "Ms. Hart." "I need a problem." "Removed," she said, pacing the room. "Not eliminated, discredited, quietly, permanently. Can you do that?" The voice chuckled. "Of course, discrediting is easier than disposal. What's the target's weakness?" Evelyn's smile returned, cold and sharp. "Find out what makes him human. Everyone has something, a debt, a secret, a family member they'd do anything to protect. Expose it, and he'll crumble. And when he does, Donovan will see him for what he truly is, an imposter." She ended the call and leaned back against the window, her reflection merging with the glittering city lights. "Let's see how long you last, Marcus," she whispered. "You may have saved the company once, but I built this empire brick by brick, and I won't lose it to a man with a mop and a notebook." Meanwhile, across town, Marcus sat at his small kitchen table, flipping through the worn notebook again. For the first time, he felt its weight not as hope, but as a burden. Each scribbled note, each line of code was now a spotlight shining on him. And in the shadows of the city, Evelyn Hart had already begun to strike. The Donovan Global headquarters gleamed brighter than usual that morning, as if the skyscraper itself sensed change in the air. Marcus arrived early, notebook tucked inside his backpack like always, though today the weight of it seemed heavier. He had barely stepped into the lobby when whispers followed him. Executives in polished suits, assistants carrying stacks of papers, even security guards. Everyone glanced his way. Some smiled politely, others frowned with thinly veiled suspicion. At first, Marcus thought it was admiration. Word must have spread about the boardroom, he told himself. But as he rode the elevator to the top floor, snippets of hushed voices reached him. Heard he hacked into private files. Doesn't even have a degree. Probably faked half of it. His stomach tightened when he entered. His temporary office, small but respectable compared to his janitor's closet, he found an envelope waiting on his desk. No name, just the company's letterhead. Marcus opened it. Inside was a single printed email thread, allegedly between him and a mysterious offshore contact. The messages hinted at him selling Donovan Global's trade secrets. His blood ran cold. This isn't real. Someone planted this. Before he could process further, the door opened. Evelyn Hart stood in the doorway, elegant as ever, her smile a mask of sympathy. "Rough morning?" she asked sweetly, closing the door behind her. Marcus clenched the fake, papers in his hand. "You know exactly what this is." Evelyn tilted her head, feigning innocence. "I don't. But people are talking, Marcus. It's unfortunate. You burst onto the scene as a hero, but heroes fall the hardest when they hide secrets." Her eyes flicked to the notebook poking out of his bag. "Especially when they carry evidence around with them." Marcus's pulse quickened. "Why are you doing this?" Evelyn leaned closer, her perfume sharp, her tone low and venomous. "Because power isn't given. It's protected. And you, Janitor, are a threat to everything I've built. Donovan may not see it yet, but I will make sure he does. The question is, will you survive long enough to watch it happen?" She left as swiftly as she came, heels clicking like a countdown. Marcus sat frozen, his mind racing. He knew Evelyn was behind the smear, but he had no proof. And worse, he realized how fragile his position was. One whisper, one forged document, one seed of doubt. And everything he'd earned could vanish. Still, as he opened his notebook and stared at the coded solutions scribbled within, a resolve hardened in him. If Evelyn wants a war, he thought, then I'll give her one. But not with lies. With truth. What Marcus didn't know was that Evelyn's operatives had already begun digging, and they had found something buried deep in his past, something she planned to use to destroy him once and for all. The first strike came quietly. Marcus arrived at work the next morning to find his name splashed across an internal memo. Not a congratulations, not recognition. Instead, an anonymous report accusing him of falsifying his resume. Self-taught? Or self-made liar? The memo questioned. The document had circulated to managers and department heads before Marcus even knew it existed. And at the bottom, stamped in bold, pending internal investigation. Meanwhile, 3 floors down, Evelyn Hart sat in her private office, sipping espresso as her assistant displayed Marcus's background check on a projector. Born in Newark, dropped out of high school at 17. Odd jobs, janitorial work. Nothing remarkable, the assistant recited. Keep going, Evelyn ordered. The assistant hesitated. Well, there's this. 12 years ago, Marcus's younger brother, Daniel, was arrested for a string of minor thefts. The charges were dismissed, but Marcus's name shows up on several police reports. Wrong place, wrong time, trying to defend his brother. Evelyn smiled, thin and sharp. Perfect. A family stain. He won't be able to scrub it clean. If I paint him as someone raised in crime, the board will see him as a liability. Her assistant frowned. But Marcus himself was never charged. Evelyn's eyes hardened. Perception is more powerful than truth. Remember that. Upstairs, Marcus sat at his desk, staring at the memo. His notebook lay open, untouched. Normally, his pen would be racing across the page, chasing solutions. But now, every line blurred beneath the weight of accusation. They're already coming for me, he thought. Evelyn isn't wasting time. He ran a hand across his face. He could endure insults. He could endure whispers. But if she dragged his brother into this, his chest tightened. Daniel had struggled for years to stay on the right path. Marcus had promised to protect him, to prove they weren't defined by where they came from. Now Evelyn was about to weaponize the one thing he'd kept. Buried. That afternoon, a knock at his door startled him. Mr. Reed? It was Claire, a junior analyst with bright eyes and a reputation for asking too many questions in meetings. She slipped into his office, holding a thick folder. I thought you should see this, she whispered, closing the door. Marcus frowned. What is it? It's the investigation file Evelyn's team is pushing. I overheard them in the copy room. They want the board to believe you're a fraud. Marcus's hands trembled as he opened the folder. His brother's name stared back at him, highlighted, underlined. Who gave you this? He asked, voice low. Claire hesitated, then said, let's just say, not everyone here thinks Evelyn should win. You helped this company when no one else could. Some of us believe in you. For the first time since the storm began, Marcus felt a flicker of hope. He wasn't entirely alone. Still, Evelyn's shadow loomed large. And Marcus knew, if she was digging into his past, she would not stop until she found something that could break him completely. The headlines hit like a thunderclap. By morning, the story was everywhere, not just on Donovan Global's intranet, but splashed across financial blogs, tabloids, and even trending on social media. Janitor turned executive. Hyde's troubled past. Marcus Reed's family ties to crime surface amidst promotion. Billionaire CEO risking company by trusting a custodian. Marcus stared at the glowing screen in the cafeteria, his breakfast untouched. Every whisper, every sideways glance, from employees cut deeper than any headline. He hadn't spoken to Daniel in months. And now his brother's mistakes, buried years ago, were dragged out under glaring lights. On the top floor, Evelyn leaned back in her chair as a news anchor replayed the story she'd planted. While Marcus Reed was never charged, his brother, Daniel, was arrested multiple times for theft and vandalism. Critics now question CEO Donovan's judgment in elevating someone with such questionable ties to the heart of the company's leadership team. Evelyn's lips curled. People don't care about the truth, she whispered to herself. They care about the story. The board meeting that afternoon was brutal. Donovan, we can't risk this merger, one director snapped. Optics matter. Do you want shareholders believing we hand out executive positions to janitors with criminal families? Another added. Marcus sat at the far end of the table, feeling smaller with every word. No one addressed him directly. He wasn't Marcus the problem solver anymore. He was Marcus the scandal. Donovan finally slammed a fist on the polished table. Enough. His voice was sharp, commanding. The room fell silent. I don't give a damn what the tabloids say. Marcus saved this company when none of you could. I trust him. And if you can't see the difference between perception and reality, maybe you're in the wrong business. The room quieted, but Marcus could feel the shift. Even with Donovan's defense, the board's faith was fractured. Evelyn's smear had worked. Seeds of doubt had been planted. That evening, Marcus sat alone in his small apartment, staring at his brother's name scrawled in old police reports Evelyn had dredged up. His phone buzzed. It was Daniel. Marcus, his brother's voice cracked through the receiver. I saw the news. I'm sorry, man. I never meant to drag you down with me. Marcus swallowed hard. It's not your fault. This is Evelyn's doing. But it's my past she's using, Daniel said. If I disappear, maybe it'll be easier for you. No, Marcus snapped, fiercer than he intended. You're my brother. She doesn't get to use us like weapons. If she wants a fight, she's going to get one. For the first time since the smear began, Marcus felt a new fire rising in his chest. Evelyn thought dragging his past into the light would destroy him, but Marcus was done hiding from it. If she wanted war, he was ready. The storm had raged for 3 days straight. Articles, opinion pieces, even late-night comedians used Marcus's story as their punchline. But while the world mocked, Donovan was silent, biding his time. Perception is power, Donovan said as he poured a glass of scotch in his office. The city skyline burned orange behind him. Evelyn understands that. She thinks if she controls the story, she controls the outcome. Marcus stood across from him, shoulders tense. And she's winning. People don't care that I fixed the system. They care that my brother screwed up 10 years ago. Donovan smirked. That's because you're letting her write the script. We're going to flip it. He slid a thick folder across the desk. Marcus opened it to see a stack of documents, research, bank transfers, email chains. Evelyn's fingerprints all over deals she swore she had no connection to. Marcus's eyes widened. You already have this? Donovan's smile was razor sharp. Never start a war without knowing where the enemy keeps their ammunition. The next day, Marcus walked into the office not as a victim, but as a man with a mission. He called Daniel. First thing in the morning, you're going to help me, Marcus said firmly. Daniel hesitated. Marcus, I don't belong in your world. You're my brother, Marcus cut in. And Evelyn thinks you're my weakness. Let's show her you're my strength. Meanwhile, Evelyn prepared her next move. She sat at a glass table surrounded by reporters, feeding them sound bites laced with poison. Marcus Reed may be intelligent, but loyalty matters in business, she said smoothly. If his own family couldn't be trusted with the law, how can we trust him with billions of dollars? The reporters scribbled furiously, not realizing they were pawns in her chess game. By evening, Donovan summoned Marcus into a secure conference room, just the two of them. You've been reactive, Donovan said, leaning forward. Now it's time to be proactive. He tapped the folder again. Evelyn's not just attacking you. She's been siphoning money out of our subsidiary accounts for years, hiding it in shell companies. We expose that. We don't just clear your name. We destroy her. Marcus felt a spark of something he hadn't felt in days, hope, but also fear. What if it backfires? He asked quietly. Donovan's eyes locked on his. Then we burn with her, but if we win, He leaned back, a slow grin forming. We don't just save the company, we redefine it. Marcus stared at the pile of evidence between them. He thought of Evelyn's smirk, of the board's doubt, of Daniel's voice shaking with guilt. For the first time since the smear began, Marcus smiled. "Let's end this," he said. The boardroom buzzed with nervous energy. For the first time, in weeks, it wasn't because of a crisis. It was anticipation. Every major media outlet was streaming the press conference live. Donovan stood at the podium, calm as ever, while Marcus sat just behind him. 1,000 cameras captured every flicker of expression. "Ladies and gentlemen," Donovan began, his voice smooth as silk. "Over the past weeks, lies have been told. A good man's reputation has been dragged through the mud. That ends today." He paused, letting the silence stretch. The room leaned in. "Marcus Reed," Donovan said, gesturing toward him, "is not only the man who saved this company from collapse, but the man who uncovered a financial scheme designed to bleed us dry." From within, gasps rippled through the audience. Marcus's chest tightened. This was it. Donovan held up a folder. "The evidence we present today proves that certain individuals, while accusing others of weakness, were in fact engaged in fraud. Millions siphoned, hidden through shell accounts. And one name connects them all." He let the pause linger just long enough. Evelyn Cross. Reporters exploded with questions. Cameras zoomed in. Screens across the country replayed Donovan's words on loop. Marcus clenched his fists under the table. This wasn't just defense. This was war. Across the city, Evelyn watched the broadcast from her glass penthouse, a glass of champagne, frozen halfway to her lips. For the first time, her mask cracked. "They dare," she whispered, her voice low and venomous. She slammed the glass down, shattering it against the marble counter. "This isn't over. If Donovan wants a war, I'll give him one." By nightfall, the media storm had shifted. Hashtags praising Marcus trended worldwide. Stockholders began questioning Evelyn's credibility. The tide was turning, but Marcus knew it was only the beginning. Back in his modest apartment, he found Daniel waiting for him, eyes red but determined. "You were amazing," Daniel said, his voice trembling. "They finally see who you are." Marcus sat beside him, exhausted. "It's not over. Evelyn won't let go that easily. She's too powerful." Daniel nodded. "Then we fight harder." In a quiet moment before bed, Marcus opened his old, battered notebook, the same one that had started this journey. On a fresh page, he wrote 4 words in firm, steady handwriting. "Don't let her win." Evelyn Cross had spent her career turning enemies into dust. One press conference wasn't going to end her reign. She sat in her private study, walls lined with leather-bound books she never read, a fire crackling behind her. The air smelled faintly of cigar smoke and expensive perfume. Around her sat 2 of the most ruthless lawyers in the country, along with a digital forensic specialist who looked like he hadn't seen daylight in weeks. Donovan embarrassed. "Me," Evelyn said, her tone cold. "He painted me as a criminal in front of the entire world. That cannot stand." The lawyer cleared his throat carefully. "The documents Donovan presented are damning. But if we shift the narrative—" "Not if," Evelyn interrupted. "When?" Her eyes narrowed. "Marcus Reed, he's their golden boy. Tear him apart." Within 48 hours, the smear campaign began. Anonymous articles flooded business blogs. Janitor turned executive, or fraud in disguise. Talk shows debated whether Marcus had faked his backstory to gain sympathy. Old photos of him in worn-out clothes were dug up, spun as evidence of instability. But Evelyn didn't stop there. She had found something darker. Daniel, Marcus's younger brother, had once been arrested at 16 for shoplifting groceries when they were barely surviving. It was a mistake Daniel had paid for, sealed and forgotten. But Evelyn's people dug it out, magnified it, and plastered it across headlines. The Reed family secret, can we trust them? When Marcus saw the headline, he felt as though someone had punched the air out of his lungs. Daniel sat on the couch, pale, staring at the television. His mugshot, a scared, skinny teenager, filled the screen. "I'm sorry," Daniel whispered, his voice breaking. "I never wanted this to come back. I thought I could start over." Marcus knelt in front of him, gripping his shoulders. "You did start over. That was years ago. They're just trying to use you to get to me." Tears welled in Daniel's eyes. "But now the whole world sees me as a criminal again. What if this ruins everything you've worked for?" The next morning, Marcus walked into Donovan's office. His face was pale, his jaw tight. "She went after Daniel," Marcus said flatly. Donovan leaned back, his expression darkening. "I warned you she was ruthless. She'll destroy anyone close to you if it means breaking you." Marcus slammed his fist against the desk. "Then we hit back harder, not just with evidence, but with the truth. People need to see who Evelyn really is. Not just a fraud, but a predator who preys on weakness." Donovan studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "If you're ready for war, Marcus, then we fight with everything we have." That night, Evelyn appeared on a prime-time business talk show, smiling like a queen who had already won. "I'm not here to attack anyone," she said smoothly, "but I do believe shareholders deserve to know the truth about the people suddenly thrust into leadership roles. Background matters. Integrity matters." Her smile widened just enough to be venomous. "And some people, no matter how hard they try, can never outrun their past." The audience applauded. Marcus watched from his apartment, fists clenched. "She's not just attacking me," he said quietly. "She's attacking Daniel. She's telling the world that people like us never deserve a second chance." He looked down at his battered notebook, then back at Daniel. "No," Marcus whispered. "We're not going to let her write our story." The smear campaign was working. Marcus couldn't walk into Donovan Tech's lobby without hearing whispers. Some employees looked at him with pity, others with suspicion. A few avoided eye contact entirely, as though his presence alone was toxic. Even the board, though impressed by his past victories, began to question whether Donovan had placed too much faith in him. After all, Evelyn's narrative was persuasive. What did a janitor know about billion-dollar mergers? Marcus sat alone in his office late one night, the city lights glowing beyond the glass walls. His notebook lay open in front of him, its pages filled with years of ideas, solutions, and dreams. But tonight, the words blurred. For the first time since Donovan had given him a chance, Marcus felt like the janitor again, invisible, underestimated, and one mistake away from being thrown out. Daniel entered quietly, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He set one down in front of Marcus. "You've been staring at that page for an hour," Daniel said softly. Marcus didn't look up. "Maybe Evelyn's right. Maybe I don't belong here. Look at what's happening. They don't see me as a strategist or a leader. They see a janitor who got lucky." Daniel's voice sharpened. "That's exactly what she wants you to think. She's trying to make you forget who you are. But Marcus, you didn't just get lucky. You earned this. You saved this company when no one else could. You've done things none of those boardroom experts could do." Marcus finally met his brother's gaze. Daniel's eyes were burning, not with shame, but with defiance. "She dragged me into this," Daniel continued, his jaw tight. "She made me feel like I was that scared kid again. But I'm not, and neither are you. We've fought too hard to let her win." Marcus leaned back, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. For a long moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the hum of the city. Then Marcus closed the notebook. "You're right," he said quietly, but with a growing fire. This notebook isn't just pages of ideas. It's proof that brilliance can come from anywhere. And if I give up now, then Evelyn wins, not just against me, but against everyone who's ever been underestimated. He stood, squaring his shoulders. She thinks she's exposed my weakness, but what she doesn't understand is that my so-called weakness, where I came from, what I've lived through, is my strength. Daniel smiled faintly. Now that sounds like my brother. The next morning, Marcus walked into the boardroom with Donovan by his side. The directors, tense and skeptical, waited to hear what he had to say. Marcus placed his battered notebook on the table, the same one Evelyn had mocked. He didn't apologize. He didn't defend himself. Instead, he told his story, unflinchingly, honestly, without shame. He spoke of scrubbing floors at midnight while secretly studying code, of surviving when the world had written him off, of Daniel's mistake, not as a scandal, but as a reminder that second chances matter. By the time he finished, the room was silent. Donovan rose and placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. Ladies and gentlemen, you've just seen what Evelyn Cross never will, true leadership, the kind that isn't afraid of truth, that doesn't run from scars but turns them into strength. Somewhere deep inside, Marcus felt the shift. He was no longer the janitor holding a notebook. He was the architect of something far greater, a new culture, a new vision, a new way of proving that brilliance isn't born from privilege, but from perseverance. That night, Evelyn watched the broadcast of Marcus's speech from her penthouse suite. For the first time, her glass of wine trembled in her hand. He hadn't broken. He had grown stronger. Her smile faded. The war was far from over. The boardroom battle had ended. Evelyn Cross, once untouchable, had been exposed, her schemes laid bare, her allies abandoning her one by one. The media turned, shareholders revolted, and her empire began to crumble. But for Marcus, the victory wasn't about destroying Evelyn. It was about proving something greater, that brilliance can come from anywhere, even from a janitor's notebook. 1 week later, Donovan stood at the podium of the company's annual shareholder meeting. Cameras flashed, journalists leaned forward, and thousands of employees watched the live stream. Today, Donovan began, his voice steady and strong, we close a chapter of deceit and open one of transformation. Our future won't be built on privilege or old names. It will be built on merit, integrity, and courage. He turned slightly, gesturing to Marcus, who stood beside him in a tailored suit that still felt strange on his shoulders. This man, Donovan continued, once cleaned our floors. He now helps build our future. His story is proof that true genius doesn't need a corner office or a Harvard degree. It just needs a chance. The room erupted into applause. Cameras zoomed in on Marcus, who, for the first time, didn't look away in embarrassment. He met the cameras head-on. Later that night, after the applause had faded and the stage lights dimmed, Marcus sat alone in his office. In front of him lay the battered notebook, the same one that had carried him through years of invisibility, self-doubt, and long nights of quiet brilliance. He flipped to the last empty page. Slowly, deliberately, he wrote, "This notebook began as my escape. Now it is my legacy. May the next dreamer who finds themselves overlooked remember this. Genius is not where you come from. It is what you dare to build." He closed the notebook. For the first time in years, it felt complete. Marcus went on to lead Donovan Tech into a new era, where hiring wasn't about pedigree, but about potential. Scholarships were founded in his name, opening doors for countless underprivileged students, who, like him, once felt invisible. Daniel rebuilt his life too, no longer haunted by Evelyn's manipulations. Side by side, the brothers stood as proof that second chances were worth fighting for. As for Evelyn Cross, her name became a cautionary. Tail, a reminder that power without integrity always collapses. And Mr. Donovan, the billionaire who once hid behind a cold, ruthless mask, found a strange, unexpected joy in being proven wrong. Marcus hadn't just saved his company, he had saved him too. From cynicism, from isolation, from forgetting what leadership was supposed to mean. On a quiet evening, Marcus walked out of the skyscraper that now bore his name on one of its towers. He looked up at the city lights and smiled. Once he had swept the floors here. Now, he was building the future. The janitor was gone. The architect had arrived.